I'm Sonya Morton Firth, and you're tuned in to the Sonya Morton Firth Show. Today, my guest is Chris Michaels, veteran author of 6 books and host of the Dark Side podcast. After being diagnosed with PTSD, Chris was put on antidepressants for many years. He reached a turning point after being homeless and coming out of an abusive relationship. Now, Chris pioneers to help others with their mental health issues. Chris, thank you so much for being a guest on my show. And I know normally it's the other way around. You're normally the other side and doing the interviewing. How does it feel to be on this side of the camera?
To be honest, it's more relaxing. It's actually more relaxing, and I can speak more, because when you know yourself, when you do podcasts, you do interviews, your brain's running at 100 miles an hour. What's the next question? How can I divide, how can I direct this? What's the next? How can I interloop it to something else, to another question, or get one question, and you're kind of having to keep directing. Your brain's running at 100 miles an hour because you're conscious of time, but you're also conscious of content, essentially. So it's very relaxing. People asking me the questions, I can quite easily sit all day.
Sit back, relax, have a cup of tea. Now, listen, I've got to tell our audience where you're from, because you're a fellow Northerner, and that's the first thing I picked up when we spoke a few weeks ago. How are things up north?
Well, at the moment it's in a balance. So essentially they're talking about potentially looking at further lockdowns, maybe moving into a higher tier. But to be honest, I don't agree with it. I don't agree in that sense, because I think it's amazing what Liverpool have done, and they managed to fight and keep the gyms open, because I think that's an essential service.
I honestly, if they close gyms, and I know we're getting straight into this, I'm going to time myself to the machines because it's the one thing. I mean, it's not the one thing. There are lots of things, but it's keeping us fit, healthy, and our mental health, our sanity. And I personally don't, and other people that I've spoken to, I don't understand the logic behind shutting the gyms over and above other establishments.
Well, I've never understood it, because my argument I've always gone it towards, essentially, how can you have pubs, restaurants, fast food that are potentially unhealthy for you?
Yeah.
Okay. There's that risk, and then obviously that burden on NHS. But then you've got a gym. You can keep all the pubs and the food part, because we know it's money orientated on that aspect.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you've got gyms that are not only good for your physical health, your mental health, but it's also social aspects.
Yeah.
Because essentially what you've got to remember, people have been isolated for the last 6 months. Now there's been a massive, we've seen a rate of suicide, rocket.
And Chris, I mean, you're a massive advocate and pioneer in the mental health space. And obviously I want to talk about your background. Before we get to that, you just mentioned that, and I think this is really important at this moment, the suicide rates, taking away the physical side of COVID and all that stuff aside, what it's doing to people's mental health. I mean, what are you seeing? Certainly we're hearing suicide rates are going up. Are you hearing from people that you know and that are on your say social media and your network that they're suffering more?
I'd say there's been an increase of it, because you see naturally when you're attuned to that, because before I went through everything, I was I wouldn't say I was naive in it, but I didn't really pick up on it as much. But I've got a lot of empathy for people. But when you go through trauma, that kind of magnifies, so you understand it better from that perspective. But the problem I see is a shift in people, or I see a lot of people have, say, shut down their social media accounts, or they're there one moment and you think, you see people's changing behavior. That's the first thing you see, that's how you'll notice it. It's people's behavior. They usually go quiet, or you'll see what the content that they're posting. And you kind of work out that balance of people, the mental state. Now you can always see, I mean, pre-lockdown, you can usually tell the way people talk, the way they express themselves. And a lot of people do it through social media, whether that be a quote or a meme or, whatever they want to put out there. and you kind of pick up on people's behaviors, because as humans, I think we're quite intuitive about behavior. And then the more empathy you have in you, the more you'll understand that perspective. So as I've seen a big rise in it, the way people put themselves out there. I've seen how they change, how their language changes. And I think on one aspect, that's the time when you've got to kind of jump in the DM and say, are you okay? Is everything okay? It's those kinds when you see it as a person and you see a shift in someone's behavior, then that's why I've constantly kept on, putting the podcasts out there. I've constantly put out every day, I'll try and put content out there every morning. And I get a lot of people who will come back and say, thank you, or that's just what I need to read. Because I think, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing thing people do is look at their social media.
They do, don't they?
So,
and it's a terrible, it's a habit. And, I know all these tools that you do in the morning, and I'm just like, I don't want to look at my phone, but I do. And it's like, that's a thing that I tell other people, don't do that first thing in the morning. And yet I catch myself doing it. And it's so difficult to just switch off and think, no, you don't actually need to look at that. It's just a habit that's formed.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what I've come to do, and I know this is something I've heard other people do, it's before you go into any of your platforms, like I'll meditate. And I know there was another guy, Lam from Ronin Tactics out in the States, and he said the same thing. The first thing he wants to do is wake up, and he wants to be connected, but to himself and to the outside, environment. So you have that mindfulness, you have meditation, and that's something I've always put out there as well. Do meditation. It doesn't make difference who you are. It's a great tool.
I think it's an absolutely amazing tool, but it took me a while not to get into it, but I think to feel like I could do it, because I think an easy excuse, and I hear people say it all the time, is, oh, I don't have time to meditate. And it's like, well, that's exactly why you need to meditate.
Exactly.
How do you find, when do you do it, Chris? And what do you find the best way to do it? Because all of this, I hear people that say you've got to sit cross-legged in a certain position. Yeah. I think that's bollocks, to be honest.
Yeah.
Meditation can be different things to different people. I personally love being outside in nature. Yeah. And I get a lot from the outside, and that's just sitting or even walking is meditation for me. But Chris, tell me, what is it? What do you find the best thing to do?
Well, personally, I think it's everyone's personal choice. For myself, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll just sit for those 10 minutes, because you've got to remember that's 10 minutes. Now that's 10 minutes out of 24 hours. Now that's not much time really to switch off, because obviously my brain runs so fast anyway. I find that what I do is I disconnect from everything, but I'm reconnected. So I'm kind of in that, there's a state of mind I like to get into, is something called mushin. Now mushin is like no mind. So you've got three states of mind, essentially, by the Japanese. You've got like the beginner mind, you've got mushin, and you've got the like later on mind, where you are active. But what it is, mushin is basically no mind. So you kind of like, you've switched everything off. You've cleared your mind of everything. And it's to get that concentration on breathing.
Do you actually get out of bed to meditate? Do you do it first thing in the morning?
I'll do it first thing in the morning. I'll sit on the bed. I think myself, I've tried lots of different ways, and I think you just got to find something that's comfortable for you. Yeah. So for myself, I'd rather, even just sitting on a bed, and it's just that disconnection, because they kind of say on the apps, like, you could put your feet on the floor or find a place where you're comfortable. But I find by putting your foot on the floor, you're grounding yourself straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you touched earlier on the fact that you've been through your own trauma, which helps you empathize with people that are going through their own mental health issues. Can you take me back to your trauma and what you went through? And I know this is a start of a long story, but it'd be great if you could just give us a little bit of background. And I know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Because really what it was is, you're talking 20 years. You're talking a good 20, been now 21 years. So really, I joined the military in 99. helicopter engineer. I mean, like obviously my first choice, because obviously you get your choices. So I was like, what do I do? Do I go Army? Do I go Royal Navy, Air Force? And I always thought, well, I'd love to travel the world. That was the first thing I wanted to do.
And what made you sign up? Did you have a sort of a calling for it? Did you have any family in the military?
Well, obviously I had family in the military, but what it was I wanted to do something that I wanted to excel in something. But I always thought, right, work it out. Do I want to travel? Do I want a career out of it? Do I want, and I just kind of broke it down into that part of it. So what do I want to do? Do I want to do something that I can come out and I can use as that skill, essentially? And then obviously I'm going to get a lot of benefits from it anyway. But also the other part, obviously I wanted to travel. And I kind of thought, well, the Navy is a great way of traveling the world. You're getting it free. Great, bonus. You'll come out with a skill. Great, I'll go down that route. Now, I wasn't quite sure. Originally, I wanted to go diver. That was actually the first thing I wanted to do. But at the time, I was under the impression that you could only go side route because it was kind of like a side branch, same as PTI at the time. The year that I joined, they changed it to direct entry, which essentially means you could just join up as a clearance diver. I was a bit gutted because I went for air engineering mechanic for helicopters, and I thought it's something completely different. And I thought, well, I'll try that route. I'm going to get a lot out of it. I didn't realize till a good 18 months later that I was going to get anything out of it. So I went through, done all the courses, done everything. And I knew there was a higher calling for us anyway, because it got to a point about 18 months in. And I was like, right, speaking to a chief one day, I was in a hangar and I was saying to him, what are you up to? Because he's just come to the last 22 years. And he said to me, he says, I've got to do this qualification. I says, well, you've done 22 years. You've got all your qualifications. He says, no, he says, you have to pay £1,000. This was at the time, this is in, I'd say 2000, 2001. So he said basically he had to go and pay £1,000, go on a qualification course for the civilian aircraft license, which essentially means he can go and work on civilian aircraft, because you can't use any of your skills or anything outside the military. It's basically, it was a dead end.
Basically what you're saying is they weren't transferable.
No transferable skills.
Transferable.
Yeah.
So that's when you found that out.
I knew there was a change. I knew that's when I wanted to change. I knew that's when, because I'd always been in two minds. I'm a very honest person. I'll take something as it comes, and then I'm always constantly analysing situations. So I'm very analytical in that way. And I found out that out later on why. But like basically it was a case of I knew I had to make a change, because I thought, do I want to go on this route? And I was like, yes, no. But I made a decision, right, I'm going to either go for clearance diver, go for the actual divers branch, or I'll go Royal Marine Commandos. But the thing is, when you're in the Navy, most people think you can transfer across. You can't. You have to physically leave the Royal Navy and then join the Royal Marines. Because my end goal almost was I wanted to go into the Royal Marines and then go for Special Forces selection. That was the path that I'd looked at, because I kind of got to a point where I said I'd rather jump out of the helicopters than fix them. That was that attitude. I'm very, I was basically like an adrenaline junkie.
And look, I haven't served, but I have spoken to a lot of veterans, and I do think, in fact, I've just interviewed a guy that was in the SAS, and was a Royal Marine Commando, and he's doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, big adventurer. And there seems to be, and I've interviewed as well, Darren Hardy, friend, and there seems to be a link, and I wanted to know your opinion on this, between adrenaline and being in the military. And is there a link? Do you think there is a link when people come out and they don't experience that anymore because they're not serving, they're not fighting, they're not there, they can't let go of this adrenaline, and then they maybe go for it in different forms?
Yeah, there's a definite link, I would say. The amount of veterans I've spoken to, because to me, you're essentially you're a drug addict. You think of it in that terms. Obviously, adrenaline is the natural drug within our body.
Yeah.
And then there's no greater rush than being a firefight in that. Basically, when you're in a scenario where it's life and death, that is probably the most ultimate adrenaline rush you can physically be in. and get and experience. You can jump out of planes all day, you can scuba dive, you can, you know, dive deeper, you can drive fast cars, ride motorbikes, you can do all that. But really, when it comes to a firefight, that is a life and death situation. And I know the amount of people that I spoke to that when they're left, it was like they're constantly looking for that rush, that next rush. Because especially if you think about it, we've been at war for all those years, Afghan, Iraq, and it was very kinetic tours. There was a lot of firefights, there was a lot of danger there. And it was like they thrived off that. Once they got that taste of that action, because that's essentially what you're trained to do. And I think what it was as well, when you get that taste of adrenaline, you think about it as like a heroin junkie. Basically, once you start on that path, you constantly want that next rush. You want to, it's like chasing the dragon, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, and you want that next rush, don't you? You want you know to feel that point where you're alive. You're at the most. Your senses are at the most alive. Everything's about you the most alive. You know, you've got to think this is like. And people have basically said it. They just loved it. It became addictive, and people have said that war is addictive.
So you changed, basically. You had to come out to go back in. That's where.
Well, I'd got that decision because I'd spoken to one of my bosses, and he basically said, right, this is what it is, because he told us that. He says, if you want to leave, he says, join Royal Marines, he says, you're going to have to leave. Basically, that's it. You have to leave and then do PRMC, you know, and go down that route. Or there is obviously, like, because we discussed obviously diver, because I'd love diving, love scuba diving, you know, and it was just basically something. I love the water. I'm a natural water baby. I feel most calm and peace in water, especially diving. And I just found myself, I wanted to go down that route. So that was why I decided I want to go Royal Marines and then go for Special Boat Service. And basically I got to the point, right, I've got to train for this. So I started training natural mile and a half, putting Bergens on, you know, increasing the weight just to get that stamina. Because obviously I've spoken to, and you know him as well, Dean Stott, and like me and Dean were chatting about this, and he said himself personally, it's the hardest course he's ever done.
Really?
For, you know, for Royal Navy diver, and he's obviously done Special Forces selection, and I know that because I've known other people who've done the courses as well, and it is, and a lot of people said it's one of the toughest courses you can do. So I had to not only mentally prepare for it, I had to physically prepare for it. So I was like, right, I put the Bergens on, and I remember one day I was out training for it. It's just on the base itself, because I was down at Cold Rose at the time. Going around, I was coming to the end of my mile and a half, and then suddenly my right knee just gave out, completely gave out, and I went down, and I was like, that doesn't feel good, it doesn't sound good. So I managed to get up, and it was only a short distance to the medical bay anyway, so I managed to get over there, and before I had any x-rays, CAT scans, or anything done, I was speaking to a commander surgeon, and he basically put his hand on my knee, and he was like, move this way, move that way, and he said, you've got floating bone in there, basically, you've broken something.
Oh. Okay.
He knew it straight away just by feeling the knee.
Yeah.
And I was like, you sure? Are you sure? And he's like, yeah. He says, but I can't be sure until I get obviously the x-rays and the CAT scans done. So I was like, fine. So obviously I had to like manage to like strap it all up and manage to thought, right, I'm going to knock on the head for training for now, because I was literally due to move back up to Scotland. So I managed, it was a couple of weeks I had to go, and I managed to get a obviously hospital appointment. It's Plymouth Hospital. And they gave us my x-rays, and I was like, I'll have a look, you know, interesting to see. So I'm not a doctor, but when I pulled them out and I looked at them, you've got like a trident shape in the knee, almost looks like. And this bit of it, the middle bit, tip, was completely snapped off. It was jagged. That I completely broke off. So I was like, no wonder that if that's what's broken, it was completely destroyed. And so obviously I went for the CAT scan, but now this is where the interesting part is. I then went on deployment up to Scotland, and I kept going back to the medical bay. And I said, so I'm waiting for my results to turn up, because can I get this fixed? I need to get this fixed, because I want to try out for like divers, and I want to go for that. And they basically turned around and they kept saying, oh, we haven't heard anything yet. We haven't heard anything. And I thought, it's a bit strange. I had a CAT scan a few weeks back. You know, surely would have had results by now. It took me 3 months to get back on it. It was literally about 3 months later I found out, and I walked in, I went, right, have you got them? Because I kept going backwards and forwards, and they turned around and says, it's torn ligaments. I says, no, it's not. And I knew that because I was getting a lot of pain from it. I couldn't walk on it properly. I couldn't bend my knees properly. They were locking out. I couldn't even squat because it was literally the pressure on my knees. And I was like, and I said to him, I said, no, it's not. And he said, yes, it's just torn ligaments, you'll be fine. And I was thinking, something's not right here. And that's when I started noticing my mental health deteriorating. And that's when it was starting to get the panic attacks.
So I was going to say, when you said deteriorating, what sort of feelings were you getting, or how was it coming across?
It was claustrophobia. It was almost, because obviously I was living on board Ark all at the time, and where the got obviously the mess decks, you've got like 2 sets of bunk beds essentially. So you've got a bottom bunk, and it's about a meter between the bottom bunk and the top bunk, like on your head space. So you've got very small spaces, and even down by where the bomb bay is, you have to go down a big, long, like deep ladder. But essentially, it's in like a metal cage. And every time you go down one level, you've got to like close this metal grid above your head. So you constantly, like, it felt for a while, it felt weird. I was like, I don't feel right, because it was like I was starting to get really panicky in small spaces, and I thought, I've never been like this. And it was like that really bad claustrophobia that was kicking in, and I was starting to wake up in the middle of the night thinking, it doesn't feel right. It feels like I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And I thought, I'll be fine. You know what I mean? It's like, and I remember going on leave for the weekend, and that was it. It was someone clicked in this, and like, I can't go back. I cannot physically go back in that environment. And I was like, right, what can I do next? Then what's going to happen next? And basically they phoned us and they went, right, you're going to have to come to this, something called the captain's table. Essentially you stand in front of a captain, and then you get all of your discharge papers, everything like that. And I just felt like I couldn't get back in the environment. And they phoned us and went, right, you've got the captain's table, and I can't do it. I physically couldn't make that travel to there. It was someone just stopping us constantly, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm stressing out. And they went, right, you don't have to come then, but what we can tell you is you're going to lose all benefits and rights. So I was basically stripped of a pension.
So basically, you were basically told that you had to face somebody, which sounds like a pretty humiliating experience anyway. And you were going through this awful anxiety, panic attack, and they wouldn't help you through it?
Basically, I had somebody phone us up saying, one of the lads on board, didn't really know him that well, and he says, oh, you'll be fine, mate. Loads of people have like anxiety, or loads of people have a bit of panic now and again, but you'll be fine. Just come on, just get back on board, crack on. I had a commander phone us up, and he says, he threatened us to say, get on back on board. At the time, he says, you will get back on board. And I was like, sir, I'm not being disrespectful, but I can't be back in that environment. That's what's causing the problems. And it wouldn't be so bad had it turned around and said, right, you've got to like obviously go to another naval base, and you've got to like go there, and we'll and that's where you've got to go. You won't go back, you won't go on board ship until we like obviously investigate this. It was almost like, you will go here because we've told you to. This is where your orders are, and you will do it.
And yet, if somebody had, I think, done something like that to me in a different situation, let's say it wasn't the military, I think I wouldn't look upon that organization in a very good manner. But I know you do a lot for veterans. You are very much involved in the community. You're very much a pioneer in mental health, and particularly around veterans. How has that made you feel towards the military?
To be honest, I've got no hard feelings. Because I look at it as, at the end of the day, you're just doing it. You're doing a job. You're getting paid a wage to do essentially a contract. You sign a contract. You're going to do it. You get paid that job to do a contract. It's essentially no different from what people are doing who were doing on the circuit. Throughout like the Iraq and Afghan period. Essentially they're getting paid to do that job. That's it. That's why I looked at it at that point. The only point, because you've got to remember, in 2000, the government never officially recognised PTSD. It didn't exist. It wasn't even a term back then. Essentially, it wasn't until the lads started coming back from Iraq, Afghan, that they started actually thinking, yeah, maybe there is a problem here. But they still never talked about it, never did nothing about it until you're talking past the invasion of Helmand. So you're going way into going into late 2010, going into those period of times that people started speaking out more. And really, like I said, even then, there was nothing called PTSD back then.
So what, at what stage you were diagnosed 8 years later after you came out?
Yeah.
And had you hit rock bottom at that stage, or?
Thing was that when I came out, and they basically turned around and went to a doctor, and they went, right, you go on fluoxetine at first, and that was it, basic fluoxetine. And
just so people know, that's an antidepressant, right?
yeah, antidepressant. It's because you usually get two types prescribed to you. You either get fluoxetine, but that's quite old school now, or you got sertraline, which is the newer kind. I did a good few years on. I was literally, all I was doing was going backwards towards the doctor, speaking to him. How are you feeling? Well, not any better. And because I was still getting panic attacks, I was still getting anxiety, I was still getting blackouts, I was still, everything, I was still getting flashbacks. I was waking up in the middle of the night, standing in front of windows when thunderstorms were going on. I can't even remember it.
And
I'd have arguments and fights with sleep.
Did they not sort of say that counselling or chatting or talking to somebody, or some alternative ways, rather than chucking loads of hard meds down your throat, which is essentially a load of rubbish, really, especially if they haven't.
They gave us CBT. They turned around and went, go to CBT. So I went to CBT, and they basically turned around and went, there's some colouring books, colour them in. I went, well, how's that meant to do anything?
It can work for some people. It can work for some people. Painting. It can.
But the problem is, so as I was going through, obviously, counselling, that's all I was basically doing, CBT. And I was like, this isn't working. What's that meant to do for me? They were giving it, I was on, obviously, medication. I went on propranolol as well for my heart, because obviously my heart was racing half the time. But what it was I was comfortably numb. I was spaced. I was like, my head was in the clouds constantly. It was to basically slow my brain down. It was like just to numb us out as a zombie-us.
I mean, I've only been on Valium once, and that was back pain. And I was wrongly diagnosed. I wanted to come off it straight away. Everyone else was going, wow, you're on Valium. I was like, I hate it. It's horrible. I feel like a zombie. I wanted to come. I actually did come myself, and that was for back pain. It wasn't for anything. It was misdiagnosed. But yeah, to be on it for years, I just, you're not yourself, right?
It's like, it's weird, because it's like, what it was I was taking propranolol, and I didn't realize at the time I was taking them. And I remember walking up the stairs one day, and I remember like I just completely blacked out, and I was like, this is weird. So I stepped back for some reason. I stepped back. I was at the top of the stairs. So I've basically done, my legs just went over the top of my head. I went rolling down the stairs. I've done that. I fell into baths. I basically took all the skin off my arm, because like I was trying to make a cup of coffee, and I must have had my finger just on the on button, and it just boiled and boiled and boiled, and the kettle exploded. And I literally just took all the skin off my arm. And it was like, I can't even remember half this stuff. I was like a zombie. I was just completely spaced out. Why
do the medical profession subscribe these? I'm not here to criticize, but I have to say, I hear it time and time again that the first thing people do with mental health issues is, here, take these drugs, take these, you'll feel fine in the morning, sort of thing. Where I don't think that's the answer to physical problems or mental problems. Actually, I don't think I think taking drugs like that doesn't necessarily help. It just relieves the symptom rather than actually looking at the root cause.
Absolutely, because essentially what it is, they'll give you medication, and the reason why it's an easy option. That is it. It's a cheap, easy option, because you got to think about it, especially if you're talking, because now we've come to be a little bit more educated. The PTSD, and the way I look at it is that when you break it down, essentially your post-traumatic stress disorder. And I look at it as post, so that's something after something's happened. And that doesn't say what, but it's any kind of trauma. So you can go car accidents, rape, physical violence, domestic violence. Domestic violence is one of the biggest crimes in the world. You got to think about this. You've got all these different traumas. So anybody who's been like, it's after a traumatic experience, then you've got the stress part. Yes, of course, there's going to be stress in the mind and the body. You've got a trauma. When you break it down, this PTSD, it's basically after trauma, stress. They call it a disorder, but I think that's, it's an injury. It's essentially an injury to the mind, to the body.
Yeah.
It is that injury. You know, when you've got things like TBIs, like traumatic blast injuries, they're all injury based,
Yeah.
essentially.
And how did you get down to the root? Did you get down to the root cause of it?
It was actually around 2010, because what it was I kept going back to doctors, kept giving more medication. And I was like, this isn't working. You'd expect after a good 2-3 years, and the problem isn't identified or even fixed, or there is a route to be fixing somebody. You would think that like they would look at it further. They didn't. It was like, literally, there's your tablets, get on it, you know. And it was until what it was I went to doctors, and he started chatting. It's a new doctor, and most doctors now are locums. And we got chatting, and he says, I've been looking at your records, and it's your for military. And I was like, yeah. And like, he asked us obviously about a few things, and like home life and that. And I was in a relationship at the time, and explained a few things. And he was like, right, okay. Start listening. And he went, I believe you've got PTSD. I went, nah, I haven't got PTSD. I said, I was never frontline. Now, this is the biggest part. Most people think that PTSD is only for frontline soldiers. And as I just explained that, it's not. It's for many different types of trauma. Essentially, it is a traumatic experience. You know, I mean, firefighters don't know why they're not given the support that, you know, that's more traumatic than, you know, than a lot of things. Or, you know, any of the emergency services, you know, police, you know, the fire brigade, ambulance, the things they see and do. It's like, that is a traumatic experience half the time. Absolutely. Because I think what as well, when people think of it as in like traumatic experiences, is especially like military culture was a drinking culture. It's only really changed. It changed probably in the last 10 years. And there's some great people out there doing things like James Elliott, doing mental resilience, got Mike Chadwick. You know, they are looking at all these different things now, which is the great part of it. You are looking at all these, let's look at the science behind it, because essentially you put a human into a traumatic experience, it's fight or flight, it was no it. But what it is we're not educated enough. That's the problem, is not enough real education out there. And that's what it is.
So that basically, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, it is.
You'll do fine. We won't talk about what you went through. Take some beats away. So okay, so you don't. So it wasn't the military that for your own trauma.
No.
And how did you go to the next stage? And did you heal yourself? Did this doctor, when he realized that it was post-traumatic stress, did he refer you or do anything else? Or?
He did, and that was the game changer. That was it. What it was obviously I've been through counselling services and things like that. Did nothing for us. I went to see it was actually a psychiatrist, NHS psychiatrist, and she broke it down. She didn't have to. It wasn't obviously, but she said to me, I've done a bit of research, and I was like, okay. And she explained every step of this trauma, and this is how you potentially get it, you know, how you develop it, should you say. Then this is what it does to you. This is how you feel. And I was ticking all these boxes off, and I was like, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And I was like, the flashbacks, this, that, everything else. It was like, and I'd already gone through a lot of, like, obviously trauma-based as well in relationship. There was a lot of trauma attached to that. It was basically between me and her, she basically broke it down, and we're like, wow. Because she even said to me, the other part of it is because I'm highly analytic. I'm very highly analytical, apparently. And most people think, what's highly analytical? And I was explaining this. Think of a piece of music. Most people say, you know, I love the sound of that music. My brain's automatically going, how do you work that out? How do you play that? I mean, I could literally break down helicopters down the last nut and bolt, motorbikes, cars, computers. Give me something. I look at everything as a big Lego kit. I will break everything down to the smallest component until I've worked it out.
But the one thing you
my brain
is relationships, right? Is that where it's sort of?
Yeah, it was basically that was the other part. That was the mix of it. A lot of people, and now it's getting put out there more. A lot of people, when they think of, like, say, mentally abusive relationships, they think of it as like male female or female male.
Yeah.
They don't see being in environment. Now, a lot of people might not pick up on this, but it's when that person you're with, if you're a male, for example, we know of domestic violence, we know of violence against women, we know of mental, abuse, the way, percentage of men go on, but then people, they don't look at that aspect the way women are. Now, when you're in a situation where you're basically boxed in and your body is in fight mode 24/7, it was like I went through so much hypervigilance, it was unreal. It was like I was walking down streets, I was looking in reflections, I was making analytical decisions there and then, like, looking at exfil sites, infill sites. I was thinking, right, this. Like I said, walking down the street, all constantly looking reflections in windows. I was literally like Spidey sense, think of it as being, or I was waiting for the next fight to happen. I was waiting for the next argument to happen. I was waiting for all this to happen. My body was running on adrenaline. That was essentially it. It was like,
were you told this about your relationship, or did you sort of come to that like realization and think, oh my God, I'm in an abusive relationship? And like you say, for a man to talk about it's difficult for me to say because obviously I'm not a man, but
yeah.
For you to be able to talk about it, is there a resistance there, or a feeling like
it's the ego? It's a male ego. Basically. Yeah, it's a male ego, because men are designed to be, I'm tough, I'm strong, I'm this. That's the same as any trauma-based. Men is built on ego, and this is where the problem. At the end of the day, you as a man, you do not need to feel you have to put up this front, and this is where, at the end of the day, people have got to realize, regardless of sex, we've all got emotion.
Absolutely.
And that is the basis of human behavior and human, genetics, human DNA. We are going to get upset about something. We're going to get angry about something. And that was another part of it as well. I know myself, and that's when obviously I was like this. I was almost like this. I call it the pressure cooker. I call it like, it's like a pressure cooker. Think of that. You keep putting all that trauma into a pressure cooker. Same as you put ingredients. You shut the lid, and then you put on that heat. The more that's boiling, the more that ingredients is putting in there, the more, and you've got to have that release valve. And I was getting to a point where I was getting more and more angry inside. And I was like, and for me, it was years late, a good few years later, that I looked at as controlled violence, because essentially when you're in the military, and like men on a whole, we're natural born fighters. That's it. If you go back to Neanderthal times, you go back to caveman times, we're natural fighters. If a fight's there, we'll fight. That's it. And I think what it is this whole DNA, we're designed to be strong. We're designed to be tough. We're not supposed to show any emotion. And that's very much instilled in the military. And you can understand why there's an aspect in the military. You've got to basically switch off from any other emotion when you're going to go and take another person's life. That's it. You've got to make decisions that, are you going to fight, or are you going to flight, basically? And that can be put into any scenario. But on that one, that's when you up the ante, essentially, because you've just constantly made a decision that, because the way I looked at it is being team leader, and I had my team in front of me, those guys are going to go home safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess
that's it.
That's your job as team leader.
Yeah.
And how do you translate that into then, putting in yourself in this scenario of being in a relationship, or being back, in civilian life, and having this mental trauma, but not being able to act on it, because you can't obviously just shoot your other half. You might want to.
Yeah.
There's repercussions behind that. So is that when it sort of builds up in this pressure cooker?
Yeah. It's that pressure cooker, like I say, you can't physically do anything. And when it's getting to the point where there's arguments upon arguments upon arguments, and you're waiting for that next fight, and you're thinking, right, and you've got to take up that calm. I'm very naturally a calm person, but when you put into scenarios where you literally, you want to do, if it was a man-on-man argument, that's, it's a different situation. But when it's a man against a woman, you're kind of like, you're pushing my limits now. And no matter what you're physically, you're saying it to the person, and it's like, right, so you've just got to kind of, and you're keeping all this inside you, and you've just got to constantly keep backing down, because it's like, that's it. That's what you live in. You live in that scenario where you just want to. And I can understand people will go out there, and it's like they need that breather. They need to take that back step, you know? And it's like, you're in that situation, and you want to act, you want to say something, and you think, well, if I say something, that's more fuel on the fire.
Do you think, sorry,
do
you think there's, because, you know, we're now in this situation of a lockdown, and, you know, there's a lot of pressure on relationships anyway, because, you know, men and women, or well, I'm not just going to say men and women, could be men and men, women, whatever. That we're in this, you know, unless you're living on your own, you're confined to a space which isn't that. We're not naturally meant to be together 24/7. That's natural. Don't you think there's going to be a lot more pressure for relationships to, I mean, we've already heard divorce rates are up. We've heard domestic violence is on the up. What would you suggest for, well, for men, let's put it this way, men that are feeling this way, they're at home, and, you know, I'm not being sexist at all here, but I'm just putting the scenario over. They're at home, they're with their wife or their girlfriend, and they're feeling this frustration. What
I would say the greatest thing I ever found was exercise. That was it. It was a leveler for me. And obviously I'm part of another gym self-harmers club. And most people when they hear that, they think self-harm. And it's like, no, what it is you're mentally destroying your body to physically help yourself. That's it.
I love that, because I lift weights, and obviously you have to destroy a muscle to rebuild it. And, you know, I'm a big weightlifter. That's why I used to do physique competitions. I love it. So I quite like that analogy. Yeah, that's gym self-harmers. I like that. Yeah,
because it's like, obviously Rob Vickers, who runs it. I had Rob on the podcast, and me and him are very good friends. We've done a 30-mile for the Three Peaks not long back to raise money for mental health charities and that. But like, really, it's like something that I can actually, when I got involved with gym self-harmers, but even before this, I knew that physical exercise was my go-to. It was that point where you've got to physically let this out. You've got to have that pressure cooker. You've got that release valve. And when you're doing that, you've got to find a way. It's just the most positive way to release stress. And that is, you know, either chucking weights around, lifting weights, physically pushing yourself to a limit, like physically. And I would say anybody in that situation, you can do so much at home. You know, there's so much you can do. You can adapt, you can overcome. And like, even if it's like, you can go online and find sand weights, you know, you can use sand for weights, you can use concrete for weights, you can use anything around yourself, and it's about adapt and overcome. And it's about finding those things. And even if it is just to do an exercise, even boxing, you know, I used to do obviously a lot of kickboxing, even boxing, and you can find so many different things that will release that tension inside yourself, because it's essentially the part where mental health happens when you're locked in an environment. And we are tribal as people. We're very much attuned to tribes. We must be in tribes. Essentially, we naturally go that way. But what it is when you're locked into a one-on-one situation, whatever sex you are, there's gonna be pressure there.
Oh,
you know, there's going to be flares and tension. There naturally is.
There's other things that you do as well, though, Chris. You're a great writer, and you've got to tell me, how many books have you written? Because it's not just one.
Is it 6, 7 books now?
Wow.
Sometimes I forget, because I just write for writing's sake. I go because that was another part is therapy. That was my therapy. Because see, what it was like, when I found out, like, obviously I got the answer essentially to the problem that I had, and I do believe that I've been misdiagnosed of being ADHD and autism for most of my life. You know, because I'm about 3. I think I'm 3 points off high of autistics off the spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah, and then basically like a wild kid that basically had ADHD.
and you've never been diagnosed as such.
I was put down as crazy.
Oh yeah,
I was crazy.
I think a lot of kids now are now sort of, now they know, don't they, that it's ADHD.
Yeah.
But we were all crazy when we were younger.
But it was literally, I was basically put down as you're crazy. And that was from the people that I grew up around. Yeah, basically you're crazy and that's it. It was like, it was kind of, because you got to remember, obviously growing up in the 80s, it was like none of this what we see now ever happened, you know. And kids, yes, get hyperactive kids. I was wild. I was like, you know, so much energy there. Was like this, just and I didn't realize I'm quite like introvert as well on a lot of scales. I like talking to people, and to do this took a lot, because I mean, a good few years, like 2 years back, you know, I wouldn't done this. I did, like I said, it took a lot to even do the podcast.
That's amazing.
And to me, it's because, pardon?
The podcast is amazing as well. We'll do a shout out to your podcast as well, because
Thank you.
Really is, Chris. I mean, that's how I found out about you. Obviously,
Yeah.
A lot of people that we know in the veteran community, but your podcast kept popping up, and it's amazing. Love it.
No, I appreciate that. But I would say there's so many underlying factors when you've got so many different elements into a mix. So when I kind of started breaking this down, and this is through like obviously working alongside a psychiatrist, and that's when I started, it was a make or break in my head. And I was like, right, now I'm seeing the pattern. It's starting to understand it. When you've actually got the right person that will work with you and break down your, like the issues that you're facing, because this is the biggest problem in mental health that I found. When you do, because I've done mental health courses, I've done like obviously like a level 1 introduction course, done a level 2 on mental health, and I found that all bases of mental health is essentially anxiety and depression. That's what your foundation of mental health is, those two elements. You can throw the mix in, you can throw in bipolar, PTSD, you can throw in all these different parts, but essentially what it is they are the foundations of any mental health. But also myself, I find that the biggest foundation is frustration. It's being put into situations that you haven't got control of.
Yeah, you're not in control.
That's it. That is your basis of all mental health. Because when you physically look at it, you've got to have a mediocre control of everything, haven't you?
Do you put writing and your training, your working out as how you got through those dark days? Because I
would say so.
You're off the meds now, right? You must.
Yeah.
What was that point where did you go to cold turkey, or did they sort of
I did. I went cold turkey. I went through 3 months of hell. Because what it was I didn't, obviously when I made the make or break decision, I wanted to make up, I had to break this cycle. I was like, I'm unwell, I've got a mental health issue, I've got this, you know, this illness essentially. I want to find out, I'm going to fix myself. I will do whatever it takes to fix myself and get better. And then, to be honest, what I know now was nothing compared to what I knew then. It was just this burning desire. I needed to change. I needed to get help. I needed to fix myself. And it was like, I started writing things down, scribbling things down, and that's how the first book came around, actually. And I was like, put this in, and it started building and building and building. You remember the Blackberries?
Yes.
Blackberry phones. Blackberry Touch. I had one of them, and I had a real problem with concentrating on things. I couldn't concentrate on anything, and it was like, I just couldn't. And it was just something I thought, I'm going to push myself, and I've started just writing a few things down, just like little sentences almost. And I was really bad at writing. I found that I had to literally teach myself to read and write again. Before all this, I was a speed reader. I could just polish through books like War and Peace in 5 days, you know, things like that. I could just fire through them. And I got to the point where I just couldn't even read something. I was like, just get bored, I switch off, and I think, right. And then I just got this Blackberry, and I was like, right, if I just write down a few sentences each day, and it just built and built and built and built, and I like this, because I switched off from everything. It was like this little zone I was in, and I was like, I like this. And then it was just more and more and more. And like I said, that's how the first book came around, because it was like, I took a small area of my life and I started writing this book. And then it was just in my brain, I was starting to put things into order again. I was like, right, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I knew I had to make that massive leap of faith almost. you know, and I was still taking the medications. I was still on that. And I was like, but it's not going to let me control my life. I'm going to take control.
So what do you think was the final, if you like, savior that took you off the meds? And
it was basically, I got to a point where I was sick of being comfortably numb. I was walking around like a zombie half the time. I was just like, half the time I was just like, yeah, right. And I was like, no. And it was, what it was obviously, when obviously the relationship broke, clean break, bang, done, finished. And it was, I'd made that decision. I was like, right. And then when obviously I told the person 2 weeks before I took that step forward, and they were like, no, it ain't happening. I was like, yes, it is. It's over, done with. I'd made that decision. I was like, no, that's it. I'm taking control back of my life. I'm not going to be, I mean, I've been homeless. I've been through the ringer, everything. And I was like, right, I'm going to take control back of my life. This is where I call the shots on my life, what I do. And it basically, I made that decision, it's make or break. So I made that decision and I broke it. And what it was I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of anger inside. It's angry. And I'm not an angry person. And the thing was, I was like, I just wanted, like, I was getting really stressed. And I was saying, I don't know why I'm doing this for. And then it was just building and building and building. It was like this volcano. And I literally had to work out. I was getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I was doing like 500 sit-ups, 500 press-ups. I was doing boxing. I was doing weights. I was doing everything I could physically drain myself where I couldn't do anymore. I was literally like just pushing my physical limit. And that's where I identify now as the self-harmers, part of it. Because I was physically destroying my body to mentally put me in that place where I was at peace. I was like at war with myself. I was like, I wanted to. So it was,
what was the anger? Can you describe what the anger was like?
It was going through everything that happened in the relationship, betrayals, everything. It was everything. I had this, because it was almost like this fuse had been lit in us. I just literally wanted to, it was like, I want to explode. And it was like, with me, I basically hit that self-destructive button, this big red destructive button, and pressed it. And I was like, I lost that part of like, it was like you want to do something, that mission, you just got to put yourself in a mission. So what it was is actually I came back into that military mindset. That's how I kind of got myself on that path. And it was like, right, I've got a mission to do. I've got my mission statement. I've got me, why, what, and how. And it was like putting that into place. And I literally used that from the military, that military mindset, to push myself forward. I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and exercise. I'd exercise like 3 times in a day, half the time. And I just want to keep pushing myself physically. And it was that point where I was right. And I brought the point, who as a person, because I thought I want to get back into work. That actually, most people who have been put on sickness benefits or put in sick, to me, it was like, I hated being off work. I just wanted to return back to something. I had to have a purpose. I had to find that purpose again. That was another thing. I can only identify with that when people say I lose that purpose, because you have that mission, you have that life you live in. And it was like, I wanted that purpose.
Have you found your purpose now?
Yeah. I found my purpose, and that is writing. It's helping other people. It's literally doing everything to help others.
And if you look back and you see how that your relationship, the bad relationship, actually benefited you now.
Yeah, I usually say you always get a positive out of a negative, and I always say that. I always look for that in anything in life. You'll always go through anything negative, but there's always positive in that negative.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Chris, listen, it's been fantastic chatting to you. Where can people find out about more? Because I'm going to put all of this obviously in the show.
Yeah.
And you
predominantly.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, because I was going to say predominantly I'm on Instagram. So it's now changed to Dark Side Podcast. So I look at it as that's my main site. Yes, it does obviously link with Facebook. All my books are on Amazon. Just put in Chris Michaels. All the books are on there. If I even go through the easier way of doing it as well, is on my Instagram. There's a bio. Once you go in there, there's a link. It's like a tree, the link tree, and you can go on there. It's about, and it takes you all to if the podcasts are all on iTunes, Spotify. So I upload all of them on that. But really, to me, I've wrote the books, and I'm glad I've done it. But to me, it's like more like I want to go down to help other people with writing, with business. I'm going to take what I've done in writing and help people build their business, essentially, because I've just created a new creative writing business, Think Creation. So that's on Instagram as well. So I've got that. I've also done another Instagram account. It's called Breaking the Stigma, because I'm going to get other people, and I want to create a world community of other people's work. So if I see something, I think, right, put it on there. I want to get everybody connected. So I want to build like platforms.
Sounds amazing. I have got one last question. It is my
sure.
one last question. And that is, if you were to write a message in the bottle for future generations to find, what would that message be?
That's always a tough one, because I always usually ask people that, what's the one piece of advice? But I would say, be kind.
Chris, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for having us on.
Meet you when I'm back up north.
Definitely.
Bye, Chris. Take care. Bye.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, there's a new interview out every Monday, so hit subscribe and like, and you'll get it straight into your inbox.